MSNBC is rebranding right now to MS Now. That stands for News, Opinion, and World. The MS, of course, originally stood for Microsoft, and it is remaining in the new title that is set to be phased in by the end of the year, according to Joe Scarboro, who had a truly fascinating and hilarious conversation about this change on his own show, Morning Joe, as this decision was announced on Monday. So, before we get into all of that, remember, subscribe at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show. We keep some of the best parts of our interviews behind that paywall for you paying subscribers. We love you. Subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts as well. Now, let's get into MS Now, because I think it tells a very interesting story, not just about media, but actually about the left. This is happening as Gavin Newsom is starting to tweet in all caps like he's Donald Trump, trying to troll Donald Trump to, I would say, varying degrees of success. And you have all kinds of high-profile Democrats trying to chart the party's new course and appeal to the types of voters who watch independent media. Now, speaking of independent media, that is a word that was used seriously as a descriptor of MSNBC in this discussion on Morning Joe Monday, as the news was broken about what exactly is happening with the name, what's happening behind the scenes. Obviously, it was spun off from Comcast, NBC, Universal. That news broke months ago. It's very interesting because MSNBC has a very, let's say, for a news network that's trying to feel independent and non-corporate, a high overhead is how we will put it in the new media space. They're a massive, they have been for years, a massive corporate network, and it's unclear how much of those resources they will retain going into the future. But during this conversation on the Morning Joe panel, Andrew Ross Sorkin said he likes the new name. He's obviously of CNBC and the New York Times, but he said he likes the new name because in some ways it gets away from the idea of legacy media. Joe Scarborough said, yeah, in agreement with that. And Sorkin described MSNBC as kind of independent and insurgent. Again, those are two words verbatim that Andrew Ross Sorkin used, independent and insurgent, for MSNBC. And he said it kind of gets away from the idea of corporate media itself. Scarborough said that. Corporate media itself. And Scarborough then went on to boast about how MSNBC is the most watched news network on TikTok and on YouTube. And that's interesting. There are all kinds of different metrics that you can use to gauge that. I doubt that that's true. It might be true in comparison with CNN and Fox. I don't know, but there are different ways you can twist those metrics. We all know that Joe Rogan has more influence on the broader public. I'm not just talking about Washington, but on the American public than Morning Joe does. We all know that. So is Joe Rogan considered a news network? Of course not. But does he do the news? Yes. So these numbers can have different meanings. Now, this is actually, though, what I think. I think Scarborough is kind of correct that the future is going to resemble for the old guys, MSNBC and CNN. We started to see this when MSNBC, it was announced, would spin off of the parent company, but they're going to look leaner. And they're going to be doing, as they put it in this discussion, nonlinear content. So they'll be making money or be trying to make their money and grow their audience on places like TikTok and YouTube. But this is where it's going to all fall apart. And I do think that's the case for MSNBC, CNN, and actually Democrats like Gavin Newsom or Alyssa Slotkin. There was a really interesting Axios story this morning or this week that I wrote about in Unheard also after it came out, because it suggested, this was a guy from Third Way, which is a centrist Democratic think tank, talking about how what the Democratic Party needs is, quote, combative centrists. And they're trying to make that oxymoron not be such an oxymoron. And that's what MSNBC is trying to do as well. And they're really flailing. And there's a very obvious reason for this. MSNBC is the network that, beyond what CNN did, beyond what the Washington Post under the banner of Democracy Dies in Darkness did, seriously, uncritically advanced the perspectives of James Comey, John Brennan, basically the intelligence community over the last 10 years. If you tuned in, I used to watch a ton of MSNBC. If you tuned in to MSNBC at any given moment, 4 years ago, drumbeat of January 6th and drumbeat of Lawfare, constantly. And if you are on the left, if you are Matt Taibbi, who we've had on the show many times, for example, that's laughable that this could resemble anything insurgent or independent or getting away from corporate media whatsoever. These stories and the lawfare were orchestrated by very wealthy people, in some cases by very powerful people in the intelligence community. We are learning more and more about the pattern of leaks that went from ostensibly, like, it seems right now, Adam Schiff, Eric Swalwell, high-profile Democrats who have been all over MSNBC for the last 10 years. And we're misleading MSNBC to write and cover and broadcast stories that have aged really poorly because they were giving so much credence to authority and to the institutions and establishments. And this is a time of great institutional distrust across the board. And I want to roll back this clip, actually, this is a clip actually from this show. I don't know if we've ever done this on Undercurrents before, but I want to roll back this clip because I don't think it got enough attention. In this interview we did with Texas Democratic Representative Ana Maria Rodriguez Ramos last week, on the show. She is the chairwoman of the Texas Legislative Progressive Caucus. She was one of the Democrats who fled Texas to try and prevent Republican redistricting of the state that would give extra seats, obviously, to Republicans in this case. At least that's the goal. When we talked to her, she gave a fascinating answer about whether this moment for Democrats resembles the Tea Party moment for Republicans, 15 years ago. And this is a question that I ask the people on the left a lot. If you watch the show, you've probably heard me do it. I've been doing this for like the last year because places like MSNBC haven't quite picked up on it. I think they are picking up on it now, but like Gavin Newsom, this is a two-step process, and they've figured out step one. I mean, like 10 years too late, but they figured out step one. They are just going to be inherently incapable of executing on step two. So let's start with step one. Here's the question this is Representative Rodriguez Ramos talking about whether this resembles the Tea Party moment. As somebody on the right, I see a lot of the sort of early Tea Party years in what Democrats are experiencing right now. It reminds me of something Beto said recently, actually. He said, who cares about the effing rules right now? Win some effing power. And it seems to me that Democrats are starting to wake up to how angry the base is about how the party has governed over the last decade plus, especially in the Trump era. So what response have you gotten from people in your district?
The people in my district are completely supportive, but you're absolutely right. It is very it's very similar to that, the early Tea Party movement. In fact, I am the chair of the Texas Legislative Progressive Caucus, and the way I vote and a lot of our extreme our Tea Party, or they're not called the Tea Party, I don't know what, the Freedom Caucus or what have you, many times we're on the same side of an issue for completely different reasons, but we are aligned in that, screw the establishment, the institution, they're not representative of the people. And so, our extreme right-wing group feels that way. And then I feel that way with a couple of my colleagues. And so the resistance is there, whether you're on the left or the right. And many times we're on the same side of this.
Note there how enthusiastic she was to agree with the point that this is like the Tea Party moment for Democrats, and how frustrated she is that her own party hasn't picked up on this for a very long time. MSNBC would be, theoretically, they would tell you, people like Joy Reid, when she was there, would tell you this was supposed to be theoretically the tip of the spear for the grassroots left. That's insane, right? Like, Joy Reid, it was always an awkward fit at MSNBC because whatever you think of her, she is an actual leftist, like a critical theory leftist. She was on a corporate arch capitalist network, no question about it. But she is somebody who, on a cultural front, does carry all of that sort of critical theory, or all of those critical theory lenses onto the suite of policy issues that are discussed. And so MSNBC had this idea that what the left wanted was lawfare and was this deep affection. You know, Alyssa Slotkin right now out there calling the CIA corn-fed good people that just want to serve their country. That is this idea of combative centrism that the Third Way representative told Axios they think is the correct path forward for Democrats. Listen, I'm just a humble conservative commentator, but Rodriguez Ramos is completely correct that what the left wants, we talked about this with Dave Weigel of Semaphore when he got back from the Fighting Oligarchy tour and said there were, quote, normie Dems hanging around the rallies of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders in the sort of height period of Doge. If you're Gavin Newsom, you know step one is trolling Trump, tweeting like Trump. You know that you can shatter that norm and it's not going to upset the base because the base does want to see you look like you're fighting, like you're punching MAGA in the nose, like you're not pulling those punches at all whatsoever. And so Harry Sisson can post, you know, pictures of himself. Did you see this one? If you're not on X, you definitely didn't see this one. Mercifully, you didn't see this one. But he posted a picture of himself with a woman's hand on his shoulder with the caption, "Well, weak MAGA losers were sitting on their phones gargling on Trump. Liberals like me were taking our girlfriends out to dinner." This was from last week. But remember, Harry Sisson, if you didn't see this one on the Adam Friedland show and couldn't get through it without looking so deeply, visibly uncomfortable with political incorrectness, right? Like they're trying to do this populist style without the populist substance. And MSNBC is going to run into the exact same problem as Gavin Newsom, who's going to run into the exact same problem as Alyssa Slotkin. Now, the populist left, like the populist right, has some of its own problems, and that includes the cultural baggage. So, right, like the people who are making this pitch about universal childcare, pre-K, healthcare, also come with, 10 years of like Zohran Mamdani saying queer liberation is defunding the police. And what we've seen as the strategy from some clever people on the left, like Mamdani, is turning down the volume on those takes or walking away from them altogether. That's a big open question about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and whoever carries the torch after Bernie Sanders. It looks like it's going to be her, is how they handle those issues going forward. Centrist Seth Moulton, we saw, walked back his take on women's sports. Gavin Newsom walked back his take on women's sports and trans treatment for children and all of that. So this is a huge, huge open question for the left right now. But the center seems to be convinced this style is going to be the answer to the problems. But what we will not see them do is really getting behind economic populism that truly attacks at the foundations of the system. Tim Ryan, interestingly, in Ohio, just announced his candidacy, or he announced, I shouldn't say announced, it broke in the news that he's considering a candidacy. Now, leftists liked Tim Ryan, then stopped liking Tim Ryan because he started trying to be pretty friendly with MAGA and in a way that came across as more centrist than progressive. But he is, a fairly progressive guy. So if he leans into maybe a more like Dan Osborne candidacy out in Nebraska and truly does run like that, if he does run in Ohio, looks like he's considering a gubernatorial bid that could pit him against Vivek Ramaswamy in a state that's pretty red but kind of swingy. That would be a fascinating race because he doesn't have quite the same cultural baggage as some others and does have a genuine leftist streak. My friends on the left might disagree with it. I'll stand by that. But that's the problem, is that a combative centrist is Alyssa Slotkin breathlessly defending the CIA on Stephen Colbert, or Gavin Newsom, just going after Donald Trump, but of course not holding a mirror up to his own oligarchic policies, and coming with all of that baggage without any of those foundational attacks on the system in a believable way that's not just style, but is also substance, which is what you do see from Donald Trump, from Bernie Sanders, from AOC, from Zohran Mamdani. And this is what the folks at MSNBC, MS Now, and I think to some extent CNN, we've talked about the business structures here a lot. It was interesting to hear that from Joe Scarboro. Again, like 10 years too late. Monoculture is no longer a thing. MSNBC was never for the monoculture. It was always for that in-between period of cable news. But you had a lot of people on MSNBC who saw themselves as straight news journalists, just right down the middle. A Stephanie Rule type, an Andrea Mitchell type. But this is the network of Nicole Wallace and Mika Brzezinski. This is the network. This is the network of Ali Velshi. It's never been a monocultural institution, but it's sort of thought it could be something with broader relevance in the Trump era, because the ratings shot up when it was doing anti-Trump stuff in the country in Trump 1.0. There was a lot of opposition. MSNBC just went so hard left, harder left than it had even in the Bush era, that, it's hard to get huge Fox-style ratings in the long term. It's hard to sustain that in the long term because that's a niche. And so now when you're a niche, you can be a niche, but you can't do it with the same overhead. You can't do it on the same budget, and you can't expect to have the same size audience. So what you do is you adapt the content to a smaller audience. You make the content match the business strategy. Lower budget, smaller audience. That means lower budget and more niche content. And I think you can do pretty good productions on a lower budget now. I know that. It's a question of how many salaries they can sustain from some of their superstars. But that question will be answered towards the end of the year as they've transitioned to MS now. And as Democrats start to ramp up the midterm cycle, 2028, that is, believe it or not, right around the corner. It's almost September. It's almost fall. By the early part of next year, these campaigns will be in full swing. So stay tuned. We'll be covering it here on Undercurrents. Make sure to subscribe at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience. Subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you back here with more soon.